Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of I'm Here Too, Building the Foundation for a Well-Lived Life, a conversation with Cynthia Cuffie, MD. I'm really excited for this one. We're going to sit down with Cynthia and hear about her early academic experiences and how those paved the way for her career success as a physician, as a corporate executive, and as an executive coach. We'll also learn how she managed to find the time to be an engaged mom of three while giving back to her community. And if you're a lover of all things home renovation, then listen closely toward the end because I think you may find that you have a show or two in common with her. So I mentioned that she found the time to be an engaged mom of three. And yes, you may notice the resemblance. She is my mom. So I'm really excited and really grateful that she took the time to sit down. So looking forward to sharing this conversation with you. Off we go. Enjoy. All right, so lessons learned. A lot of people who know me know that I am a voracious reader. What they don't know is that I actually resisted learning how to read. And I think, Mom, you were very determined to teach me. And there was a summer where every night you'd come home and we'd sit down on my bed and you'd make me read from my set of primary phonics books. I think that I shed some tears along the way, and I was pretty determined that I wasn't ever going to know how to read. It was too hard, but you made me stick with it. Same goes for summer camp. I would call you every morning, sobbing and asking to come home. Every morning, you'd get to your office, you'd see the phone number come up, and when most people would probably just say, you know what, I can ignore that call, she'll be okay, you actually picked the phone up and you would say, you can come home when the session is over, you're going to be okay. And I was. And then morning would come again, and I would cry, and we would start all over. But in both instances where I was trying to do hard things, I never felt like you didn't love me, even as we were going through that difficult time. So, with that as a setup, I'm very curious about some of the things you've learned along the way, maybe some things that weren't easy, especially around education, because I know that's such an important area of focus for you. You've set that example in your own life from the opportunities you've given us, the places where you continue to give of your discretionary time and financial resources to ensure that others have better outcomes. So, with that, I'm curious, can you describe the role that others played in building your educational foundation?
So my family, my immediate family, my mother, father, and extended family, and then my especially primary school teachers early on, and church. So with that, I had a broad exposure to different people, very interested in my education. My parents, my father had gone to school through ninth grade, and my mother had a high school diploma, but they were reared in families that believed education was a key to success. So they always emphasized that. Then there was the extended family that my father was raised by, who were highly educated, had college degrees, and was very interested in making sure I was exposed to things early. And then, of course, church. I went to a Black Baptist church, which was actually very well known for music. But we also had a very strong youth program that focused on making sure children went to college and was educated. So I had a real big exposure. And then I went to an elementary school that was in a low income area. And yet those teachers were very dedicated to making sure students did well, regardless of background. So that's the story. I was exposed all over.
So it sounds like you had a lot of people around you, whether or not they were experiencing the same things, they had a belief in you and encouraged you to do to go as far as you could.
Continuously, yes.
All right. So I'm curious about the very beginnings, right? Can you just tell us about an early educational achievement?
Well, I'll tell you about my early education, which is sort of interesting in itself. So I grew up, I guess there was not a lot of preschools or whatever. So my mother, for whatever reason, which was a great thing now I look back, put me in kindergarten when I was 4 years old. But when I became 5, I did not go to first grade because the school had a rule about age. So I stayed in kindergarten for 2 years. And I look back on that and I was like, oh, that was scarring probably. But actually, it probably gave me a really strong foundation early. My earliest academic achievement that I can remember really was feeling really excited in first grade because I was selected to be in the advanced whatever, reading group. Kids, when they're little, group 1 and whatever. And I was kind of excited about that. Ironically, reading is not my strongest skill, and I actually don't like reading as much. But that was really where it started. It was like you're in group 1 reading group.
And when we're little, the things they tell us are stories we start to tell ourselves.
That's right.
So, you talk about reading not being the thing that you think of being good at. So, how did you figure out what you were good at as you got older? Or how did you decide that you were good at something?
Well, I don't know if I decided. It just happened, I think, organically through exposure and comfort. So, how can I explain that? Math and music are my stronger areas. I love math. I like science, and music I love too. And those are the things I did really well in. But it wasn't because I sought any of them out initially when you're little. It's more, I think, exposure is very important. So math I was exposed to early because my extended family, which were 2 aunts in Florida, but one was a math professor in a community college, and the other one was a third grade elementary school teacher. And I spent my Christmas holidays with that family every year when I was young. And their idea of gifts was to take me to the teacher's resource store and get me workbooks. But most of the time they were in math and science because my uncle also worked at what was called then, I guess, Cape Canaveral, the Kennedy Space Center. So I got books primarily in the areas of math and science, very young, every year. But those were like my Christmas gifts, and I just cherished them, and I really liked working through them. And then music, I was exposed to music throughout because I went to, I told you, African American, you knew this, Baptist church, you've been there. And the music was really of a high quality for those days. Choirs were big. And I enjoyed being part of the choir. I was put in the junior choir by age 8. And I was just, I don't know, it was just exciting to be at that church and to be at a church where the choirs were really big. I mean, we competed all the time against, that's not the right word, competing, but the choirs had choir days. And one choir would try and outdo another one. And I mean, we had Sissy Houston coming from New Hope. I was an Abyssinian. We had big choirs. And I just thought that was very special. And I had my extended family in Detroit that we would visit every summer, had a piano in the house and was musical. And I used to go there and play. So I thought the songs I would hear at church by ear. And my family then told my father and mother, oh, she's gifted in music. We have to get her a piano. But I wanted an organ because that's what I loved at the church. And so I began organ lessons relatively early in life because of the exposure at church. And it all came together by high school. I went to, as you know, at the time when I grew up in Newark, the only public selective high school at that time was Arts High, where you had to demonstrate proficiency in the arts, performing and or visual, as well as academically. I was strong in math, and music was my also extracurricular that I could excel in. And from there, it was history. That was how I got there.
And somewhere along the way, you became a physician. So, how did that happen? And was that a surprise to you?
Yes and no, but more yes. Why do I say that? So when I went to college, I thought I was going to be a chemistry major. I was very strong in math and science. And I thought I was going to be a chemistry major, and not that I knew that much about what that meant. But I went to, as you know, a very strong science elite university, Cornell. And I will tell you the effect of teachers that can have on you throughout your career is very important. Some good, some not good. And when I got to Cornell, they assigned you an advisor in your area, if that's possible. And my advisor was definitely discouraging from day one. It was like, you're not going to be a science major here. I don't even want to think about what the motives were, but he wasn't encouraging. So that didn't make me feel good. And coming from being top of your class, also the excitement of being around people and having a good time first year in college. I had placed into the, not advanced, but well, the science that the engineers take, the chemistry. So I've never not succeeded in anything. So I wasn't afraid. However, it became pretty apparent after a while that, maybe I'm not getting this. And I didn't know who to go to really, because I thought I've never had the experience where I couldn't really do something on my own. And so I had to learn that after pain, not doing well that first semester in that course, that if I wanted to succeed, I better figure this out. And I did. How did I figure it out? I decided that I would seek help, get study buddies, and take advantage of the resources that were available. And that started to prove positive for me. And I also took a risk of taking a course that was not even on my radar when I went to college, only because it was my roommate. She was taking a nutrition course, and she said, "You should take this." I said, I'm interested in that. Sounds pretty cool. And the rest was history after that, because that nutrition course was outstanding. But I learned to have study buddies, professors that were actually interested in you, not only just getting the material, but really your career. So I had a lot of encouragement from that area. And so I went off to Cornell doing human nutrition research as the major. And as I was thinking about what would I do in graduate school, I decided, it was either going to be Cornell or Columbia. Those were the top, in my mind, graduate schools, because I wanted to stay on the East Coast. And so I went to visit Columbia to talk to the director at that time of the graduate school, really just exploring if I would like to be there. And he asked me a lot of questions, but one question that stuck out, he says, "What do you really want to do?" And I said, "Clinical research." And he said, "Okay." He said, "Then you need to go to med school." And no one had ever said that to me before. And I said, "Well, why is that?" He said, "Well, if you want to do research on humans, in order to do that, you have to have either an MD degree, or someone with an MD degree is always going to have to sign off on what you do." It was just that conversation, just that thought he put in my head. So I went back and I said, okay, then I better look at some pre-med summer programs. And I got into Cornell summer program in pre-med. And then the rest was, I was going to go to med school just for that reason. Now, interestingly, I had taken all the courses for pre-med for the most part, because that was required anyway. So it wasn't changing the courses basically I was taking, but it changed where I was headed.
And we'll talk about that in another section. I want to stay with the academic piece though, because there's so much of your story where, you know, you started out somebody who was used to being successful. You hit a point where you actually realized, I may not be the best at this thing, but I'm going to have the humility to find people who might be better at it and ask for help and get a community of learners and not be discouraged. I also heard that, right? You may not always meet people who have your best intentions or interests in mind.
Right.
And you sort of said, you know what, I'm still going to try to do this thing I want to do, and I'm going to continue to look for the bright spots, right? Even if they're not always.
Well, you got to understand too that it wasn't easy. I didn't just like, oh, I better do
Yeah.
this and this is the prescription. Oh no, I had a whole family counting on me to do well. A whole community, church, family, extended family, friends. It was going to feel pretty bad if I didn't figure it out. I didn't have an easy way of figuring it out. I had friends in school who said, this is what's worked for us. And it happened that way. But it was not like, oh, okay, I know I need to ask for help. I wasn't sure how to do it.
Yeah. Well, given all of that, you know, there's echoes in your story. I didn't always know all of your story when I was going through my own academic journey, but one thing sticks out. You said, you know, taking a course you weren't sure you're going to be good at it. You know, I remember I came home and I said, "Oh, I'm in macroeconomics," and you said, "Oh, tell me about that. How's that going?" And I said, "Well," and I started to explain things about supply, demand, and it was pretty clear that I really had no idea. Um, but the reason I ended up in that class was actually when I was going through freshman year courses and, you know, going through with my advisor. And this was at Princeton. I said, I'm going to take macroeconomics. And she said, Ara, I don't know. You're pretty arts focused and you're really good at, you know, English and humanities. Are you sure you want to take macroeconomics? And I said, I don't know. I'm curious about it. And I think what, you know, sort of the way that you raised us was to be curious, to be focused on being excellent, but not at the risk of not taking risks or trying things. And you know, I had to ask for help. I didn't get a great grade in that, and I survived. But I'm wondering, you know, are there things that either you wish you had known that you know now, or there are things that you learned and then you did pass them along, whether it was indirectly or directly to, you know, me, my sisters, others?
Yeah. When I went to college, it was in the 70s. So it was an interesting time socially in this country as well. I was pretty narrowly focused on taking something where I would get a career where I could make money. Because that was, I thought, my focus. I thought that was the end all for education. I actually was very interested in anthropology. Now that is kind of, and you say why? I was just curious about different cultures. But someone said to me, and I don't know who, made a comment that you won't make any money. And I knew my parents had sent me to college to make money. And so I was like, oh, I guess I shouldn't really study that. And I didn't know a lot about a lot of careers. I knew doctors, I knew lawyers, I knew a narrow focus of successful people. So I didn't think about a lot of different things outside of the box. What I would have done differently, I would have explored probably different courses. I might have taken more time. Well, I don't know, it costs money, but I might have tried to explore more, open up my horizon because of interests and not because you are prescribed to go to this career, this track, let's do it. That's what I think I would have done differently a little bit if I could have. But I didn't have the luxury to go to college forever either. I mean, and that's the other thing.
And what did you pass along, or maybe what did you hold back? Maybe, knowing what you knew, maybe as a parent, sometimes you protect your children from some things. Are there things in your academic experience that you tried to shield them from, or are there things you're just like, you got to learn this on your own and there's nothing I can do?
No, I tried to. The one thing I tried to do is make sure they understood the importance of resources for help. And the concept of help is not because you're not good. The concept of help is you want to be the best. And I always try to portray that. So if I got them if I got them additional resources, it wasn't because I thought they weren't good at something. It was because I want you to be the best. I want you to do that extra math program. I want you to study your foreign language beyond just what you have to do in school. So I tried to instill that, broadly and going above and beyond is what education is about, at least in my mind, is what it's about. I also did try and expose you to all of you to different things. I had some idea what everyone was pretty good at, but I don't know. We never knew what was going to spark someone. But I also did try to shield you from all of you. That the reality is we still had to make a living and support ourselves. But it didn't mean that you had to do it at the expense of what you enjoyed.
Yeah, no, that resonates. I think people in high school, especially, probably thought I was definitely a problem child because you were at school a lot in the principal's office, the vice principal's office, the guidance counselor's office. Um, I just remember one day my guidance counselor is around college selection time, and I named the colleges I was thinking about, and she said something to the effect of, "Well, are you sure, Ara? Because you're jumping as high as you can, but maybe those are too high." Something to that extent. And I think there were definitely moments where I was definitely ahead of my skis, so to speak, in things like math classes. But you never let others define how fast or how far we thought we could go. Was that intentional? Were there other parents in the school, or were you like the only one kind of banging the doors down?
I don't think I was well, I might have been the only one banging the doors down as much as I did, especially when you had your child was in all the advanced classes. but that, but see, for me, it was important that no one define you by any child by limitations. That I was very serious about because I could have potentially had done that myself. And I knew what it was like and the benefits of not letting people define you by limitations and learning that, you know what, I can do almost not anything, but I can do a lot of things pretty well. And you know what? People might not have thought that just by looking at me. And so that's why I was I was at the school a lot because you were a strong student. You were one of the, as you know, you were one of the best students, but yet there were opportunities that sometimes people limited you from. I don't know why, but my attitude was that's not going to happen. She only gets limited if she's not good. If she's not good or it's not appropriate. But if she's good at it and she expresses that, then you are, as an educator, responsible for making sure she gets the exposure just like anyone else you provided for. I didn't ask for anything extra. I was just asking that they be fair. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know who else was knocking the door down, but yeah, I was there a lot.
And, I think one of the things that I admire the most of sort of how you've lived your life and also how you've parented is there is a sense of almost, I think of it as like pragmatic ambition, right? Like you can be anything you want. And I'm going to be transparent about sometimes somebody's going to tell you no, or sometimes somebody's going to say, you know what, maybe not. And helping us really shape our own ambition and our own reality and understanding that yes, the world is open to us. And yes, the world can be closed. and you have to figure out how hard you want to work to get what you want and to be who you want to be. Um, so we'll close this section though. I think the last thing I'm most curious about is, I'm not so young anymore. I'm approaching 50. And yet, my niece was visiting the other day, and I saw a workbook that looked very familiar to the one that when I was 4, she's now 5, but she's 5? She's
She's
5.
6. She just
She's
turned
6.
6.
Yeah, I'm getting old. She is 6. But I saw one of those workbooks that reminded me of that summer where we sat down and we learned how to read and we learned. And, I saw some of that with you and with her. Are there things that you are now repeating with this next generation, or have you changed your approach now that it's sort of second time around, so to speak?
You know what? Some things remain the same. So, all of you went to Montessori nursery schools, which I liked. I didn't know much about it when you first started, but I just thought the education was phenomenal and appropriate for early education. And she went to a Montessori nursery school, and the teacher had the same primary phonics books that you guys learned to read on. And the teacher was shocked when her mother told her, "My mother knows these books." I feel that reading foundation early is very important. It's not about reading just to tackle words, it's also about the approach. Feeling that, you know what, I may not know that word, but I might be able to sound it out or figure it out. That's more important. And, the education, I have followed education, has gone from all these different methods of reading. The bottom line is, I think phonics cannot hurt young children to learn how to read. So, yes, I feel those books are just as important as when you and I used to sit. And you know what? Those books are probably the ones you're talking about, or probably like 10 pages. All I was asking you to do was read a page. And it was like, oh. And now you're like one of the strongest readers I know. Reading for me was difficult, not because, I placed well in reading and all those things, but when you feel your relative strengths, it's not my strongest strength. And yet, part of that was because I always had to look up words because I was like, what does this mean? What does this mean? And it was just like, I don't want to read this. And I feel that exposure early and then grasping a strong vocabulary and figuring out things early helps that. So, yes, little grandchild has those books. Grandma emphasizes reading. Grandma takes her to the library. That's one of my favorite things to do with her. But now it's a little different because I have to bribe her too a little bit. We read, we sit, she loves to, where she lives, they have really nice libraries. We sit in the reading section, we read, I let her pick the books, we read them together. But then it's like, okay, Grandma, I read 1 or 2 books. Can I go to the computer? Which I don't particularly care for at that age, but I let her. And we monitor that. And, it can't hurt. It helps her. And she's a strong reader for her age. So, and her school actually, interestingly now, phonics is becoming a backbone of the reading program again.
Now, I don't want our listeners or our viewers to think that computer comment means that you're anything but very technologically enthusiastic. Early on, I remember, and I tease you, you said, Ara, you're going to have to learn DOS. That is the language of the future. Now, I did not, and I actually probably should have listened to you, but computers and technology, being on the cutting edge was something that you actually made sure, whether it was Mavis Beacon teaching us typing, Johns Hopkins distance learning courses, you'd hear that modem crank up and there it would be. But I think you have also set an example of not only being curious about the environment around you or the enriched environment, but also how to stay abreast of the technology that helps unlock learning and understanding. Um, you know, I think we'll talk a lot about, careers and work and life. But if I take anything away from this section, it is really the foundation for so many things we do in life. It's this being curious, knowing how to deal with hard stuff, knowing that life isn't always easy, finding people who will support and push you to be better, and also just taking that time to know who you are. I think I'll leave us with this. When I was younger, I was one of three. I was the oldest. And, I was so glad when Ashley and Ariana came along because I am not musical in the same way. And I think I got released from all of the music lessons. But I remember sometimes saying, well, Mom, it's not fair. Why do you treat them differently? Don't you love me? And, thinking about what empathy means, it is truly about seeing people for who they are. And you said, Ara, I may not give you all the same things, but I love you equally. And that's what being a parent is. So that is a lesson that I have learned, and I continue, even though I don't have children in the work setting or the academic setting. I always remember that it's not about being treated equally, it's about being treated for the person you are and helping you become the person you want to be. So, on the job learning. I have a lot of memories of you going to work with you. So the first official visit was in eighth grade. You took me and my best friend to work at Sharing Plow. I think that was maybe the first, or at least a early version of what is now Take Your Kids to Work Day. I think back then it was just Take Your Daughters to Work Day. But that was one of many. I remember early mornings, you would take me on, early insurance physical visits. You would drop me off at nursery school afterwards. We'd go, you mentioned your position. We would go to Memorial Sloan Kettering and I would hang out in the office while you were doing your fellowship. We went to Europe. We got to go on many business trips. I think they were investigator meetings, but you can correct me. But no matter where we were, I really benefited firsthand from a variety of professional experiences, what it meant to go to work. You had different colleagues, there were different settings. And so for me, once I embarked on my own journey, which has been pretty nonlinear and circuitous, um, there were times when I was maybe the youngest person in the room. Maybe I was the only African American. Maybe I was the only woman. But for me, I didn't feel like I was the first, right? I felt like I had been in corporate settings, in clinical settings, in settings outside of the United States. And that was all thanks to the exposure that you gave me. And now we're both actually executive coaches. So that's fun because we get to have a different level of, bouncing ideas off of one another and thinking things through. But I'm curious, how much did your parents share their professional lives with you?
Well, my parents had a different path. My father was only ninth grade and he worked for the government. He was a mechanic and worked at a, how can I say, I don't want to say ammunition plant, but he worked for the federal government for years. But actually, they had a family day yearly, and we always went to that. I mean, you got to realize what the years were. This was after World War II. So the U.S. was very proud of, what they had done. But we went to that every year. And my mother worked, she actually, by the time I was born, my mother was more, she worked in factories, so I didn't get to see much of that. But she didn't, it wasn't that she didn't share, it's just that I guess her work environment was not something you could take me to or talk much about.
Mm-hmm. And so, how did you learn? How did you learn, to do what you did every day?
At work?
Yeah.
Oh, well. so I mean, okay, so my job when I was a physician, I am a physician. That's on the job learning, right?
Yeah.
For sure. Even in the pharmaceutical industry, you have the medical background that's needed, but you learn the job on the job. And it's about problem solving, a lot of that. I learned a lot about problem solving all through college and all through medical school and residency and fellowship. So that's how you learn it.
Well, so I'm curious because like you, I started my career as a junior associate at a big law firm and I was doing corporate law. And a lot of that they don't teach in law school, right? Like you don't learn how to be in client service, you don't learn how to sort of approach somebody and say, "Here is a problem you're trying to solve and how do I apply my professional skills to it?" But I benefited a lot from, partners letting me sit in the room while they made the calls, senior associates explaining why things were marked up, more junior associates saying, okay, when they ask you to set up a closing room, this is actually what it means. So, this idea of like being an apprentice on the job and growing through that, that was something I actually took for granted, I think. I didn't realize that not every corporate environment is modeled on that sort of idea of, teach one, do one, and on to the next. There's a lot of talk right now about AI, right? And this idea of AI, on one hand, unlocking magic for all of us, right? We can be more efficient, we can do things that we've never done before. Younger professionals, the younger people are on some level, sometimes I assume they're more comfortable with technology. But when I speak to a lot of them, a lot of the questions are, I want to make sure that I still use my brain for problem solving. Like, I don't want to get too comfortable delegating to a machine. I guess I'm just curious. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer right now since we're in it. But as someone who learned kind of more in that, observing and then doing, how do you think about early career professionals in the areas where you work?
I think they still have to see, experience before they can do. We still design clinical trials in pharma. I mean, now pharma's big. I was in clinical research. I mean, we're talking about R&D is different. For clinical research, everything, you still have to understand if I'm writing a protocol, I'm still trying to solve a problem or demonstrate something. So regardless of how I do it, I'm still trying to do that. And there are examples of people, guidelines, and things that have done this before. It may not be the same question they're trying to solve, but maybe it's a different product. But there's a lot of things that you can learn that are still what you say, see one, do one kind of, it's still there.
Mhm. I also, think about not only the sort of varied professional settings, being in a hospital setting, being in a clinical research organization in a larger pharmaceutical company, but also about, crossing geographic boundaries. The internet has made the world feel very, very small. Like you can be on a call in India tomorrow, but when I was growing up, you had to get on a plane or you had to do a conference call and it was still, patching people in and all of these different things. But for you, how did travel change how you thought about the world or how you thought about collaboration in a professional setting?
Travel, okay. So just being in I was in a US based global company. Travel just brought to life the connections that we made and had to make. Drug development was global, so it always took into account our organizational structure, always took into account that. The travel part of that made it more real. It was more about building relationships. We had video conferencing. I know I'm not that old. We had video conferencing, and my dad and I had a team that I worked with almost primarily through video conferencing that I felt very close to. But when we got together physically, it was a different experience. I will tell you that we used those experiences, yes, to work, but more of those experiences used for social bonding, getting to understand each other better.
Are there any cross cultural experiences that made you realize that, not everything is done the way that you would have assumed it's done? Or does it help you now? You coach people around the world. Like, are there things that you're just more aware of than you might not have been previously?
Well, like I said, I was in a global company. It became very apparent very quickly that the world is big and the world doesn't do things the way the United States necessarily does them. And so I learned that not only because the requirements were different, the attitudes, maybe how the different countries look at what we're doing differently or what they feel is important to emphasize in research. So it's pretty apparent once you're in a global company, and our structures are set up to account for those differences in a way that we account for them, but yet we maximize them in a way that can hopefully bring us together for a common good.
Well, you talk about common good because I'm so focused on, if you have a mission, whether you're on a sports team, you're on a work team, being really clear about what you're trying to accomplish together, I think helps people know what they're good at, what they can do differently relative to others, and it makes it more fun. I guess for you, my question is, becoming a physician, doing drug development, these are all things that make people's lives better, right? The idea of serving others. Was that something important to you in sort of choosing your profession or how you ordered it?
I wish I could say, oh, yes, that was the motivating factor. I know, I think I picked it. Be honest with you, I picked things that seemed not so much easier to me, but seemed comfortable to do. And they never harmed anyone. So because I don't believe in that. And so ultimately it became, yeah, I am helping. But it was also something that I was good at and felt comfortable being good at.
So, I mean, you had a very and have, right? You're still in the working world, a very varied and impressive background by, objective standards. But for me, from the sidelines, I also kind of experienced you as very present in my life and in our lives as, kids growing up. We talked about how you always took my calls, no matter what you were doing or what meeting you were in. You knew all of my teachers, my tutors, camp counselors, friends. I remember tennis matches where you would be, the fence would be there. You'd be in the car looking at a document, looking at me on a call. And it felt like it was very important to you to be present. I don't really love the term work-life balance. I feel like that puts us in a different, it makes us feel like something has to always even out. But like, how did you figure out how to not only have a family, have a very big job, um, continue doing something when you decided to have the big job and move into coaching, but like you had church, you had clubs, you had friends. Like, how did you think about that? It feels like a really rich life, but it doesn't seem easy to make it all fit.
I don't know how I did it, but I will tell you the theme around all of it was my family was important to me and career was important. But my career was important in the sense that it helped me do what I wanted to do for my family and with my family. I didn't I didn't look at it totally separate. I felt that whatever I was doing at work, whatever I could share would enrich your lives. So that's why you went on the trips. I felt like that's enriching you. You get the exposure. You get to see different country. You get to see what I do. You get to see the different things. Wait, when you mentioned take our daughters to work day, I remember, I don't think there was no formal program like they have a lot of companies now. My idea, take my daughter and your friends to work day. Let me show you how we do drug calculations. You're not your favorite subject, math. And I just remember saying, I just wanted to share, what math might do for you as a skill at work. And, it was always like exposure just to see reality, what it's like. Um, you asked me, how did I put all those things together? There was a common mission for all of them. Every club, and I didn't join many clubs because I was busy, but any club that I was part of, there was the Mothers Club of Jack and Jill of America. That was designed to expose your children to educational, artistic, and different opportunities and experiences. So I spent that time doing what I felt was important for my family, right? Then there was my one, well, maybe one or two, so, or social organization, which was built on friendship, but social community service, which I felt was important. But that club, even I spent, I developed programs which my company would support, and that kind of meshed my professional life with my community life. And there were times, most of the times, it was all educational focused programs. So I was always doing something that I thought, well, you can say kill two birds with one stone or whatever, but it always had that mission of educating and exposure and helping others. So it didn't feel like all these disjointed multiple things. There was always these connections for objectives.
And I think one of you mentioned how it all came together. Sometimes people are surprised to learn that I was in a cotillion and that I was a debutante. But what I'm very quick to let them know is, well, my mom, she had a leadership program component to it. And so not only was it about learning the social graces and etiquette and not only raising money for the programs in the community, but you were really focused on us as Debs being leaders of tomorrow. So we did public speaking, we did financial planning, we did Myers Briggs, like knowing yourself, like right along with things like skincare and going to the Clinique counter and learning about etiquette. And so I think that there is this idea of not only showing us things, but also it's kind of like you don't have to wait until you're an adult to see yourself as a leader, right? You don't have to have a big job or a big title. Like it's really how you walk through the world and um, how you treat others along the way. And for me, one of the reasons I'm even doing this podcast is because I realize how fortunate I've been, right, to have such a supportive and diverse set of people in my life. Growing up, we had so many aunts and uncles who didn't really belong by blood, but were chosen family. People who were, people who were in HR at Big Pharma, who said, no, that's not how you do it. That's how you do, all of this navigation. And so I guess for me, I always felt like the more the merrier, the bigger the village, the better. Um, and you sort of talked about that too, how you had a lot of people from different parts of your family, the community, the church. I'm curious if you've noticed any differences in kind of either the personal board of directors, the lifeboat, the village, that you had to create the life that you have from the ones that either I have or, my siblings. Like, is there any difference or any similarities that you notice?
I think, and I don't know you or your siblings, my children's lives, connections, all of them. But in general, younger people, I sense that there may not be as many rich in person connections as I had as a younger person. I could be wrong about that, but that's what I sense. And I don't sense the fullness, the breadth of the exposure for the younger people.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because even I'm just sort of reflecting now on like who are the people and how did I find them? And I think for me, I just kind of have collected people along the way and I don't let them go. So, people can meet somebody from nursery school or they can meet somebody from my last job. I don't think I've been as intentional around sort of a particular
Theme.
community in, as you said, in a geographic region, so much as I've been. I guess I was like that growing up, though. I never sat at one lunch table. I always kind of wanted to sit at multiple ones. But I think what you're saying is an interesting one for us to for listeners to reflect on is how am I choosing to, create a support system around me? Like, where are the connections? Where are the places where I find belonging? Because, life is hard. And so it's always nice to have people you can turn to and say, I don't think this is going well. How do I do that? Um, I'm one of these people. I call you a lot for advice. I call, my dad, I call my stepmom, I call my sister. So we have a pretty big immediate family upon which I rely, but I have also enjoyed meeting people along the way, whether it's through the coaching program that you and I are both alumni of, which is funny, but also on the internet. People who have reached out on social media and said, I'm really interested in getting to know you. And I kind of think back to how I don't have children, but how you always put that call through. I try to think about that when somebody reaches out to me for help, to be a little more generous with my time and with my knowledge. I'm curious as we sort of wind down, and I have a lightning round we're going to get to, but as we've been talking, are any of these themes or things where you're like, I actually don't know the answer for Ara, and I'm curious.
No, but I wanted to talk about one thing you brought up. You said, right, when I was doing the leadership, the debutante, you were a debutante, but I was very strong about a leadership development program, which I res. My first people, I tease them, I'm an executive coach. My first certification was because I was doing that development leadership program for young adult, not young children, young adults. And it wasn't because I figured out, I was with someone who was certified in an assessment, and she said, oh, no, we're going to do this leadership program, then you need to be certified. And it was during a time in my career where I was relatively early, but sort of moderate, I guess, in my career, where I had gone through personally leadership development programs, and I saw the value of it. And so that was my opportunity to share that in that way. When people ask me, how did you get to executive coaching? And I say, oh, I've been doing this a long time, maybe not formally, but even at work as a senior leader, I was always involved in the leadership development programs. If they asked, I was always raised, I'll do that, I'll help. Because I saw the value of it. They spent a lot of the time doing that for me. And I felt it was very important to share that.
That's a theme, actually. That's a nice theme for me because, Hillary, my wife, Hillary, but she's often said, and I hadn't really thought of it in these terms, but that our family represents a multi generational success project. And she's noticed how much we lift each other up. And we're kind of gracious and generous. It's like, come on in. Like we want to help you too, anybody we meet. And if I could boil it down, people always ask, like, what have you learned from your parents? I think from you, one of the things is best reflected in that phrase, to whom much is given, much is required. And it stems from a Bible verse. And I know faith has been extremely important to you, and you've imbued it in us, and we've taken it and built our own systems of spirituality and faith. But I take it to mean that, those who have been blessed with more resources or talent or opportunities or knowledge, we have a greater responsibility to use that for good and to benefit others. And I think it emphasizes this idea that as hard the work is to get what you have, when you do have privilege, and privilege can exist with all sorts of oppression, and that's fine. But when you have the privilege of something, right, there's like this obligation to be a good steward of what's been entrusted. And I guess I'm curious for you. You've been able to achieve so much, but if you could share just one thing that you hope that the next generation, as this multi-generational success project continues with more, varied perspectives and backgrounds and experiences, what do you hope that the next generation would be able to achieve?
Confidence, confidence in themselves. And also, I hope they have that strong faith foundation. I do. That's important to me. And I feel like how you treat others and share your resources with others. It doesn't always have to be money. It could be time, talent, whatever. That stays important. Those are the things that are really important to me.
All right, so we're going to do a little bit of a lightning round. This is where I'm going to ask you a few questions and get some quicker responses. All right, so this first one is about what I call preoccupations. I teach a workshop called Storytelling in Public. And one of the things that we do in trying to figure out how do you take a life and actually then share it with others in a meaningful way that gives them, something to be interested in and take something from it. And we did this exercise back when I was in a creative writing course at Princeton. And it's basically in the stories that we tell ourselves or we tell each other or others, we often start with phrases like, I love, I don't like, I've always wondered, I wish, I hope, I never. Um, when I look at my writing, I think some of the weird preoccupations I seem to have are things around work life integration, those who have come before, and oddly, summer camp. I'm wondering, are there any things that you have found as themes that repeat through the course of your life or things that you're just constantly returning back to?
Yep, I think the theme of education, the importance of education, and the importance of not self-limiting yourselves. I think that theme is just constantly there.
Yeah. And that feeds in very nicely to my next question about superpowers. Because one of the things I'm excited about is learning from you and learning from others about what makes people unique. We all have something we're really good at, something that people seek us out for, something that makes us stand out. As an example, I'm really good at seeing a lot of disparate things and putting it together and saying, oh, there's a pattern here. I can see it. What's one of yours?
I always wonder, I'm really, I think, good at listening to people and figuring out what they might need to focus on. I listen very well especially if I'm coaching. And I would say when I want to, because I may not always have that superpower on display, but I do. And I think that's why people really like it when I coach them, is because they're like, she's listening.
I may be biased as your daughter, but I can attest when you decide you want to listen, your ears are wide open. All right. Well, these last two are some of my favorite questions. This is an ask, right? I'm here too. This podcast, it's about community. It's about bringing people together to learn, to share, and be inspired. And through the course of our time together, you've given us a lot. And you're very generous outside of this podcast with your time and your resources. So I want to flip it back to you. What's something that the audience can do for you?
I think if they can just be open to hearing and taking that, what we talked about, and saying, you know what, maybe this little nugget will help me, or I can apply that. Taking it to action would make me feel really good.
That's nice. All right, last one. A read, a listen, a watch. I feel like there's so much content out there and not enough time to discover it all. So, what's something you're either reading, listening to, or watching that others might enjoy?
Well, because you're my daughter, which will probably surprise everyone, my favorite thing is house renovation. I read about renovations. I watch real renovation shows. I don't like the competitive shows so much, but I mean, that's my downtime. That's another interest. I have lots of interests. Now, anyone going to leave here and want to go watch a home renovation show? Or maybe they are interested and they just never thought about it. That's what I like to do. besides all
Now,
the other things.
I know yes, home renovation, you've been very helpful to us during our renovations. What's one of your favorite shows? I know that that's a big question, but what's one of your favorites?
Well, it used to be Love It and Listed, but that's gone now. No, it's not gone. Actually, it's on. It's not too bad. Uh, Favorite shows. I still like, I like all these now. I like the lake beach, I like lakefront hunting and renovation. I like beachfront hunting and renovation. I like Married to Real Estate. I think that's a fun one. What is my favorite though? I'm thinking of the night. I used to love Flip the Flop. That's all, that's gone, but because that was like you saw, homes being renovated and kind of like, oh wow, look what they did. Those are kind of, I think, my favorite shows.
All right. I bet there's a listener or two or three or four that share your interest in all things renovation, and you might get your social media flooded with recommendations. But thank you so much for joining us, and I really enjoyed our time together. Is there anything parting words for the audience?
Enjoy life. Just keep it broad. Experience things. If I could say, just enjoy experiences. That's what I would say.
All right. Well, I love that. Thanks, Mom. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for this episode of I'm Here Too. Thank you all so much for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Cynthia Cuffie. Please remember to subscribe so that you don't miss the next conversation. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.